off the wrestling match, one day I get a call, "Is this the Glow?" I said, "Yes." "Ah, I've reached the right number. Great Ladies of Wrestling?" You do know that there is an organization called the Glow Great Ladies of Wrestling. Yes, it is. They have their own website as well. And they're all women wrestlers in that organization. I know that some of you were not here on Saturday when we launched the most anticipated classic of Meher Baba's own handwritten book, In God's Hand, which Bauji very kindly consented to launch. It is perhaps one of the most important books, and it will be a classic in spiritual literature, and will be available during the course of this month, hopefully towards the end of July. We are racing towards completing the printing of the book. And there's another book that we've planned, and that is called Every Day. And it's again by Meher Baba, and it's called Meher Baba Every Day, and it's a collection of Baba's quotes on spiritual growth for each day of the year. And it'll be a hardback, and we've planned it. We're working on it, and that should hopefully be out at least during the course towards the end of the year. So those are the two projects that we're working on at the moment. For those who were not here on Saturday, to recap a little bit, since I plan to continue as an episode 2, you all heard of the separation that we endured when Baba left Dehradun in 1953, and I was unable to see him for all those years. I continued to study in college, but my focus continued to be on Baba, reading about him, writing about him, studying him, and simply just waiting to be with him when he called. I was constantly looking for ways and means of spreading Baba's message. And that opportunity came in 1965, late 1965. Each year, the Dehradun Meher Baba Center would celebrate Baba's darshan in Dehradun. Each year they would do that in various different ways. They would hold a fair, which they called melas. They would invite speakers and so forth. That year, they decided that they wanted to do some kind of a brochure or a magazine-like thing. And we were a small group of people who decided that we would do a kind of a broadsheet with accounts of people meeting Meher Baba, the interviews that he conducted in Dehradun, a kind of a Dehradun diary. And they asked me to put it together, and we launched this little broadsheet called The Spark. And I used to work for a newspaper, so I knew how to put a magazine together. And for the picture, we used a drawing of Meher Baba, done by a deaf and dumb boy, who was a very good artist, and we gave him a picture of Baba, and he drew it, and we printed that on the cover. And it was distributed, and it was sent to Baba. And Baba sent a lovely cable to me. And of course, it said, "Letter follows." And the table was very encouraging, very warm, and he used the word spark in his spark of my love and so forth. And then in the letter, also, he was very effusive, and Baba sends his love and blessings and so forth. And then at the PS, there was a little, for the very first thing that I had produced for Baba, there was a little slight admonition that henceforth I should try and stick with photographs and not drawings or paintings unless they were very accurate and very close to Baba's features. So then, from that point onwards, and then a month or two later, I get this huge parcel from Money. It was a collection of Meher Baba's photographs. Very subtly, I was told what to do. And she wrote, if I recollect correctly, she wrote there in the little gift that she sent, that I'm sending this little gift of an album of Meher Baba's photographs. These are photographs of beloved Baba that I'm sending you. One day you will be able to get, you'll be able to have the beloved himself. Something to that effect she wrote and sent this. So the small little group of people, particularly one group captain, Manohar Sakre and his wife, Mona, were the ones behind, and my mother, were the ones behind the launching of the magazine. So we sent off to the registration of newspapers and we told them that this is what we plan to do. We plan to publish a magazine called The Spark. And promptly a reply came back saying that that name had been taken by a communist newspaper that was now defunct. That we couldn't use that name. So then the struggle started, what should we name this news magazine that we're going to start? So we shortlisted and we sent it off to Baba. And no, we first wrote to Baba saying that this was the situation and were there any thoughts? And we suggested a couple of names. The Glow was one, the Ray was the third, and Francis Brabazon suggested one as well, called In the Flow. In any case, Baba chose the Glow, and the Glow was launched. He sent a special message for the first issue, and it's been 33 years since we started the Glow. And there are quite a few people who call me and say that you probably have a very large staff looking after the Glow. And I always tell them that it's Meher Baba at my elbow goading me on. And just when I reach the lowest point of desperation where there's no material, from somewhere material comes in and I'm able to share beloved Baba's message year after year after year. And I'm very thankful to beloved Baba for allowing me to continue with the Glow. So, last Saturday we left off at the conclusion of my visit and my participation at the Third World Religions Conference in Delhi. Soon after that conference, in the evening, I met up with, I also spoke to you about Major Sohrab Bamji, the man who worked against Meher Baba, and the archival material from whom I got that. But his daughter was married to the president of the Zoroastrian Association of Delhi. So my uncle H.R. Mistry was also there in Delhi at the time. So he says, are you doing anything after dinner? And I said, no. He says, as I mentioned to you, the head priest of the Parsis had come, was also invited for this Third World Religions Conference, because from that evening's program, a day earlier, they had, from the top of Ramlila grounds, people from all faiths would come and recite a prayer. And Amar Singh Sehgal recited the Master's Prayer as well. So that evening, the head of the Zoroastrians, the head priest of the Zoroastrians, the man who looked after the community, was giving a talk at the Zoroastrian Center in New Delhi. And of course, Dogdo, that was Major Mamji's daughter, who was married to the president, he was presiding over. So we had dinner and we were heading there. So in the course of conversation, her husband says that, I don't know how long this talk will continue, but perhaps we can ask Naosherwan to say a few words, his impressions of the conference. So Dogdo said, her husband's name was Rusi, don't do that. If he might talk about MeherBaba or something to that effect. So this was just general conversation, and she said, in any case, there won't be any time. So we went there, and he gave a talk on the impact of Zoroastrians on the Indus Valley civilization, or something to that effect. And so he was a scholar, and he gave a talk. He was a venerable older man with a flowing beard, and he was wearing the gown of the Zoroastrian priest, and all the Zoroastrians, the socialites in the Zoroastrian society was gathered. And he gave this talk, and it ended a little early. So even though I wasn't completely unprepared, Rusi said, and now we have another Zoroastrian with us, who is also participating in the Third World Religions Conference, and he will give some impressions of the conference. So I came on the stage, and get-go, I started talking about MeherBaba, because those were my only impressions. Hardly had I said a few sentences when suddenly this head priest stands up and says, he turns to the audience and he says, I have never been so insulted in my life. I ask all of you to read Paul Brunton's Search in Secret India and 20th Century Hoax. And he walked out of the conference. I was naturally very embarrassed. And soon after, I continued talking, because he asked me to continue talking, Rusi, the president, because it was on his watch that I was being called. So I continued talking for a few minutes, and then we went for tea, and there were tea and biscuits at the back. All the Zoroastrians, when is MeherBaba going to break his silence? When is he going to give darshan? All these questions. Very often, when I was even in Bombay, somebody would take me inside, lock the doors in and say, when is MeherBaba going to give darshan? Is he going to come to Bombay? So we had a whole lot of closet Baba lovers in the Zoroastrian community. So I came back after all this and got a letter from Miraj to say that Baba would like a detailed account of the conference from you. So I sat down and wrote a detailed account, including this evening with the Zoroastrians. But obviously, Baba was not satisfied with my report. So I get a cable saying that Baba was inviting me to come to Guru Prasad. So, as I was mentioning to some of you, one of my weaknesses, I would say, on my spiritual path has always been my intellect. And it's always been like a millstone around my neck. Every time I always felt that my intellect was coming in the way of the complete opening of my heart. When Baba's letter came, my first question was, what questions will I ask Baba? And then there was a follow-up letter saying that this is the time that you come, and Baba will not answer any questions. So don't prepare any questions. But it was always the journalist instinct that has always come up. So it was all set, and I went there. This was 4th of May, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1966 were darshan programs, which I could not go to because I had classes. I was in college and I had classes, so I couldn't go. So it was set that May 4th, 1966, I would be in Pune. So my father was already there in Pune because he was one of the volunteers at this darshan program at Guru Prasad. So he was already there, and he came to receive me at the railway station, and I was meeting Meher Baba after many, many years. And basically, as I mentioned to you when I said the other day, I wanted to give you a feel of being in his presence. So there was a tremendous amount of anticipation. What am I going to ask? What is he going to say? Will I bow down to him? Will I embrace him? All these questions rush through your mind. How is it? Is he going? Should I prepare myself with some answers that he asks me? And often he surprises you. So I went down, took out my sandals. For those of you who know Guru Prasad, this was in the Mandli room. It was the side entrance of Guru Prasad. When you have the main hall, and then you have this huge veranda, and this was the side entrance where the Mandli sat. So I walked in, and Iraj said, "Naosherwan, you have come." So that was all he said. And I saw Baba sitting there in the middle, and all the Mandli was up against the wall. They were sitting against the wall. So Iraj said, he beckoned me further, and Baba was sitting in what is known in, particularly older women in the early days, older Zoroastrian women used to wear what's known as ijar. It's what you call culottes, or now you have those clam diggers that all the women are wearing. But this is very loose, so they're called ijars. They are 3/4 lengths. You may have in the early years seen Iraj wearing them, some of Baba's. So he was wearing that. It was sweltering, it was very, very hot, over 100 degrees in Pune at that time. Baba was bare from the waist up. So I went and I embraced him, and he crushed me with his arms, and that gave me the impetus to crush him. And he kissed me on both the cheeks, and he gave me his cheeks to kiss. On both the cheeks. And it was a feeling of kissing a woman and being embraced by a man at the same time. It was an embrace of a woman, and you got the feeling that you were kissing a woman on the cheeks. It was soft. He looked radiant. His cheeks were red. His face was flushed. And I didn't know where to sit, so I started looking around, and Iraj said, "Sit at Baba's feet." So I sat at Baba's feet. Then Iraj started by saying that, so you had a very successful visit at the Third World Religions Conference. Baba would like you to narrate everything in detail. So I don't know what happened at that moment, and it sounds so idiotic, but I started playing with my fingers as if I was the one who had to convey to him in sign language. Baba was conveying in sign language. So Iraj looks at me and says, "What are you doing? Baba is silent, you're not." It must have been some kind of nervousness or whatever. So then I start talking in Gujarati and started narrating in Gujarati. So Iraj interrupts me and says, meanwhile Baba is continuing to talk in sign language, which I couldn't understand. And Iraj says, "Baba says that Francis cannot understand Gujarati. Speak in English." So I started again from the beginning, so that Francis could understand. Then, so I started narrating the whole story, point by point, what happened. Sant Kripal Singh. Of course, he had a lot of chuckles and laughter, because very innocently I said things. See, at the Third World Religions Conference, there were also the Jains. Now, the Jain sect are Swatambar and Digambar. Now, one sect of the Jains wear clothes, the other sect are stark naked. So So they were on. So the head of the stark naked Muni Sushil Kumar was the one who was with the clothed one, and his counterpart was also on the stage. And one day earlier, we were in a procession with him leading the procession, and all his followers were naked, and we all were, there was a procession through the streets of Delhi. So Baba laughed and laughed. With all these naked men. And the women are also naked, they just wear a sari around them. They are bald, completely bald, and they just wear one sari, they cover their bodies. So I was, innocently narrating all this and creating merriment among the community. So then as I continued narrating, my father was also sitting over there at the back of the thing. It was kind of my show in that sense. So then he would listen to it, and then he was particularly interested in the Zoroastrian episode, because he always, if there was a chink in the Zoroastrian armor, it always kind of tickled him. So that was the one that made him laugh, and I could see that he was getting red in the face. And this whole incident about this priest walking out and all that was very funny. He found it very funny. So but I'm trying to recreate that entire scene. So as I'm narrating this whole story, Baba suddenly interrupts me and says, "Do you love me?" And I say, "Yes, Baba." And then he gives me the indication that I should continue with my story. So, and suddenly he would interrupt me again and ask someone else, "Do you love me?" And the other person says, "Yes, Baba." And the story would continue. It was all a part of the continuation of, it was all a part of the scenario there. And then, as I came towards the end of the story, Baba interrupted me and said, "Do you accept me as God in human form?" And without blinking an eyelid, I said, "Absolutely, Baba." And at that moment, he leans forward and puts his hand on my hand. And so when he was leaning forward with his hand, which I felt that I had been stumped at that time. So, since Baba had wanted to know the complete story of my visit, I asked him this question. And Baba, it was like a sigh of relief that, what a simple question this is. And, but immediately MeherBaba became serious and said, and he answered with Iraj interpreting, that each one of you are God in human form. Iraj is God in human form. You are God in human form. Francis is God in human form. But all of you are unconscious of your divinity. I am conscious of my divinity, and therefore I can say that I am God in human form. And it is my work, it is my job to make each one of you conscious of your divinity and to make you God as men. Man as God. To make you conscious of your divinity. And then again he said, I come to give you the conviction. And he says, have you read God Speaks? I said, yes, Baba. So I want you to read it again and again, in which I have explained in detail about conviction. And so that quickly ended the explanation. Again, it became very light-hearted. He asked somebody, do you love me? And so forth. And I ended my narration. Then Baba said, do you know any jokes? And I have a lovely sense of humor. So my mind was blank. I said, no, Baba, but I have brought my harmonica with me. I brought because they told me that Baba likes to listen to music and so forth. So carry your harmonica with you. And I used to actually play the harmonica on stage. I had a small band called the Serenaders. So we had a drummer and bongos and a guitarist, and I would play the mouth organ. So Baba said, play. So I started, in those days in the 60s, you had Come September, Havana Gila, and all those kind of numbers. So I started playing, and I was playing till I ran out of breath and songs. And I just kept, Baba didn't stop me. So I just kept playing and playing and playing. And then I stopped because I ran out of songs and breath. So then message comes from inside, Gohar comes from inside and says, Mehra wants to know whether I know Swanee River. I was a country bumpkin from the foothills of the Himalayas. I hadn't even heard of the song. No, but before I started, he had Mehra and the women Mandi open that door, and they were sitting and listening to me play. So they heard me play, and that's when she sent this message saying, do I know Swanee River? So I didn't know Swanee River. So then each year, Baba had put a ban on writing to him. But he had not put a ban on sending poems on his birthday. So each year I would send him long poems, sometimes 6 pages long, 7 pages, all to elicit a response from him, a cable from him. And promptly the cables would come. So that particular year, I had not known that I would be going for this, to be with him. So I had sent him in February, but because of this a poem, but Erit said that we have received your poem, but I haven't had a chance to read it to Baba because of all the arrangements we had to make for the darshan program and so forth. Now that you're here, why don't you read it to Baba? Now what I had sent that particular year was that each year, see, my mother would send a gift, and I would send a gift. Every year we would have our family consultation of what gift to send for Baba's birthday. And Baba would very graciously accept that gift. So we would, my mother was a teacher in embroidery and cutting, and she had her own school. She was very good with her fingers. So she would prepare a stool for Baba to put his feet. In the blue bus, you'll find one of her gifts that is still there. One year we said, what should we send Baba? Because it had to be something that she could spend 6 months to a year working on. So we decided that we would get a wooden M constructed, because my mother figured that there'd be magazines in Mirazar, and the monthly would need a place to put, the women monthly would need a place to put magazines in. So we had this magazine rack made, and in the front and back, in 2 colors, dark blue and light blue, she embroidered a pattern on the front of it. It was this high. So some of you may have seen it. So it was in one year we created a calendar of the 7 colors of Baba, and we all sat and hand painted each of the colors, and then we sent them to Baba, sent several copies and so forth. So we would send, and I would of course send a poem. So that particular year I decided that I would abstract all the Urdu and Persian words from God Speaks and create a poem and send it to him as a gift of my love. So I don't think I brought that along. I won't read the Urdu part of it, but I'll read the English part of it. Beg your pardon? You like it? Okay. I just don't want to run out of time. Okay. The title of the poem that I had given was Insan-e-Kamil, the perfect man. And this is how it read. Is fakiri mein do alam ka dora kiya, akmal ka ठिकाना तो लग जाएगा, जान की खुदी गायब कर अंजर, फिर हयात हकीकी भी मिल जाएगा. उसके पैरों पे पड़ के न फरियाद कर, माओहिब तुझे जरूर मिल जाएगा, आंखों से अल अमा हटा दे बंदे, मारिफ का पर्दा भी खुल जाएगा। दामे जिंदगी का गुलाम बन गया हूं, अहदे बहारा दिल का कभी हो जाएगा। हवादिस से कयामत बेशक आ जाए, जीस का गमे दौरा तो मिट जाएगा। अक्ल सरहदे अक्ल से निकल तो गया, डर है नाकूशे अमल में फंस जाएगा। आखिरे शब का तारा निकल तो गया, शायद शहर की फजाओं से मुका जाएगा। तेरे पेकर का दहकता शोला देखा, शोलाए जिस्म है बुझ जाएगा। मगर आग तो बापा एक ज्वाला सी थी, हाय सारा अफलाक तो चीख जाएगा। अल्लाह का राह गुजर तवील है अंजर, चलते चलते रंगे चेहरा उड़ जाएगा। आसमां में उसका मकान नहीं इंसान, तेरे दिल में तबस्सुम दिख जाएगा। मुकामे गम के अश्क में हमने मेहर को देखा, मुकामे गम के अश्क में हमने मेहर को देखा। शायद ख्यालों का सफीना पार हो जाएगा। बरबते नाहीद का धुन सुन तो लिया, शायद मेहर की तासीर का लज्जत मिल जाएगा। मेहर अर्श से आया है फकत मेरे लिए, वो कौनेन का रुख भी बदल जाएगा। सबके दिल पर एक शानदार कतबा बनाकर आलम की निगाहें खोल जाएगा। मेहर से शौके विसाल है मुझे। I particularly want to draw your attention to this quartet, because this is the one that particularly caught Baba's attention. मेहर से शौके विसाल है मुझे, नागा जमाना सोच जाएगा। राहे शौक पर पाँव उठा भी लिया, मगर जान का लिबास तो फना जाएगा। गलत कोई अफसानों को छोड़ अंजर, हस्ती का खार से नजात हो जाएगा। बस मेहर की सदा को सुनता रहे, फिर जुल्मत के अक्सों से निकल जाएगा। I'll read the English translation as well. I traverse the world as an ascetic, hoping to knock on God's door. If you erase your ego, Anzar, the ultimate truth will be your reward. Do not fall at his feet and complain. You will get the gift of desire. When you remove the darkness that clouds your eyes, the secrets of Godhood will shine forth. I am a slave in the snares of life. Will my heart ever blossom with love? Even though the world be annihilated, I know one drop soul will be released. The mind has left the limits of the mind. I fear it might get caught in the net of sanskars. The last star of the dark night has emerged. I feel the first streak of dawn will absorb it. I saw your form of flame in a glow. The heat will not last the night, but the flame in the night is a volcano of fury. Oh God, the skies will shriek in pain. The path to Godhood is so long, Anzar. As you walk the weary walk, your body will wear out. But then, why do you seek him, O man, when you can see his smile in your heart? In my moments of grief, I saw Meher in a teardrop. The vessel of my desires will now cross the ocean. Now that I have heard the music of the orbs, Meher will bless me with a glimpse of his infinite power. Meher's advent from the seventh plane is for my sake. He will also alter the destinies of mankind. He will inscribe his love on each heart and reveal his divinity to the world. I long for union with my beloved Meher. Why does the world look on me with envy? I have taken a step further on the path of love, in the knowledge that my body will be destroyed. Forget, O Anzar, all these tales of illusion. Free yourself from the web of daily existence. If you simply listen to the voice of Meher, you will emerge from the shadows of darkness. So after I finished reading this, in Urdu only, not in English, Baba does this very good So Shatrughan Kumar was there. So Baba asked him, "Do you like it?" He says, "Yes, Baba, but it was in anglicized Urdu. I spoke with a slight accent. The Urdu was anglicized." So there's a little bit of laughter there. And then again Baba became serious. And he said, "Do you know the meaning of Visal? Over here where I say, Meher se shauke Visal hai mujhe." And I said, "Yes, Baba, it means union." And then Baba throws up his hands and he says, "And what a union between the lover and the beloved." And that was his response to that. So soon after this, there were questions about my health, and I had a bit of a problem, and at that time, and I had not seen Mirzad and Meherbab, and I was constantly mixing up in the globe the two places. So I didn't know which was Upper Meherbad, which was Lower Meherbad, and so forth. So I had been, Irish had sent me long letters explaining which was Upper Meherbad, which was Lower Meherbad. So Baba said I should go and visit Ahmednagar and see Meherbad and Mirzad. But at that time he had also asked me about my health, and I had a bit of a health problem in the sense that I had stomach problems and so forth. So Gohar, he called Gohar and said, Baba asked me, and I'm narrating this for a purpose, this little anecdote because it's of interest. So he calls Gohar, and Gohar asks me, "Have you got yourself a physical?" And in India, in those days, you don't get physicals done because it's a very expensive thing to get a physical. And my father was a man of moderate means, and to get a physical done is an expensive proposition. So I said, "No, I haven't got a physical done." So then Baba tells something to Gohar, and she goes out and comes back a short while later. And she tells Baba that she had arranged for me to get a physical from Dr. Grant next door, the medical place next door. And I know my father at that moment, it crossed through his mind, how would he afford, he told me later on that it had crossed his mind, how would he afford to pay for this medical? Because they didn't know. I was suffering from severe constipation, and as a result I developed wheezing. So Gohar had asked me whether I had asthma, and I had said no. So without getting a physical, there was no way of knowing this. So Baba said, "Have you tried the various," so he named a few things. "You tried this?" And I said, "Yes, and castor oil and this." So then Baba said that for 6 months I should take what is known as Triphala. It's an Ayurvedic medicine. Three means tree and phal means fruit. It's a combination of 3 fruits. So the very next day immediately went and bought a tin, and I started taking that. But so then it was time for me. It was time for the lunch break. So it was time for me to leave, and Baba was to go in, and Mandli would go out for lunch and so forth. So he asked me to bow down, touch his feet. I bowed down, kissed both his feet, and gradually started to go back. You don't turn your back on Baba. Gradually started to go back. And at that moment, Gohar walks in again, and Baba again summons me towards him, and he hands over an envelope in my hand. So I I don't know what's in that envelope. And I just do this and walk out. And before putting my shoes on, I opened the envelope and there was 600 rupees in that envelope. And I was just completely surprised, taken aback, so I go back in. And I said, Baba, so Ira just cut me short and said, you don't turn down Baba's prasad. So I just backed off. And then, of course, the next day I went and it was 600 rupees for, and 600 rupees in those days was a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to give you a little glimpse of Baba's compassion. So then, of course, there was a little, Irish was very, very interested in my development as a poet and would keep on goading Francis Brabazon to take me under his wing. So I had sent the manuscript of In Lap of Love, which was a collection of my poems, to Baba, and this passed on to Francis Brabazon, and of course, this was poems written by a 16, 17-year-old boy. So that afternoon, while we had lunch, and Baba was inside, and I sat with Francis Brabazon. Irish egged him on to sit with me. So I start my conversation with him by saying, I said, you know, when in Milton's Paradise Lost, so he says, do you mind? Please throw Milton over the precipice. Francis Brabazon did. And then so that was my first lesson from Francis Brabazon. Anyway, then, so we spent the afternoon bantering, talking to the Mandi, exchanging. Then, in the afternoon, Baba came back to the Mandi hall, and I have a feeling I may not be able to talk about my search in Iran, but I'd like to complete my meetings with Meher Baba. I think you would enjoy that. On another occasion, I'll talk about my visit to Iran in search of Meher Baba's antiquity. So, the afternoon session, I was there, but I was not the Naosherwan Anzar show, so to say. So there was an old trunk sitting at the back of the Mandi room, and I sat on that trunk. And there were a very large contingent of Iranis who came in. And Alova was all bubbling with excitement. And they all came, and he introduced each one of them and so forth. But my recollection of that early part of the afternoon was when there was a bit of a flurry. And there's a lady who some of you might know. Her name was Dhan Sattha. And I'd seen her for the first time. She was suffering from MS, from multiple sclerosis. And she was carried and brought in. And you should have seen Baba's attitude, reaction to bringing her in. It was like, that was his world at that moment. He pulled out, despite his pain, despite his own suffering, he took a cushion, propped up her head, and she was feeling so embarrassed. You could see that she couldn't speak. She was feeling so embarrassed that she was giving Baba this trouble. And I was just looking at the scene with so much emotion in my feelings, that here was the Lord of the universe giving. Soon after that, the latter half of the evening was devoted to volunteers who had worked for the darshan program and had not had an opportunity of being with Baba. All of you have seen films of Baba, and you may have seen volunteers standing at various different places, holding hands and stopping the crowds from coming closer. And there were doctors and nurses and various volunteers at these darshan programs, and they never had a chance of coming closer to Baba, so Baba always had a time set aside for them. So that evening, that time was set aside. My father was one of the volunteers. So all these people from Pune Center and from Bombay Center and all these various centers who had come. So Baba then moved the venue to the big hall. And he was now wearing his long sadra. He was sitting on his chair. And the entire hall was filled with these volunteers. So each one of them and Ramakrishnan, who was the president of the Pune Center, would stand up and introduce each one. And Baba would ask them about their wife, about their children, and so forth. And so at one point, suddenly Iraj comes out. See, I was not a volunteer, so I was not supposed to be in that room. So I was sitting on the veranda all by myself. So Iraj comes out and says, apparently Baba must have asked him, is anybody on the veranda? So he looks out and he says, Baba Naosherwan is sitting outside. So Baba must have said something, and Iraj said, come in. And there was just one little spot near Baba, which everything else was taken. All the various the entire place was packed with people. So all these introductions were going on, and I was sitting at his feet. My back was at his feet, at his legs, and I was facing the crowd. So the entire session ended, and Baba said, let's have the Aarti. So this was the Hindi Aarti, and having come from Dehradun, I used to sing the Aarti. So I started singing the Aarti with the rest of the crowd. And as I said a few sentences, I burst out crying inconsolably. And Iraj suddenly looks at me in the middle of the Aarti and says, Naosherwan, are you okay? And Baba just says, leave him alone. And this overpowering outpouring of love for Baba was just pouring out. And I just couldn't contain myself. And as I cried, tears fell on my hand, and they were icy cold. And later on I realized that they were not the tears of passion, but the tears of pure love. At that moment, from that moment onwards, I felt that my heart had awakened to his love, and that I was able to give my intellect a bit of a backseat. There was nothing was exchanged, no conversation, that's it. And then everybody moved away. "40 days before Meher Baba dropped his body, I had the opportunity of meeting him. That was the last time that I met Meher Baba in his physical form. It was the day that Dara and Amrit got married. So all of us were invited. My parents were invited. I was invited and then disinvited. The reason I was disinvited was that, as it turned out, it was I had to go for an interview with the Times of India for a job in the newspaper. Those of you who've heard of what the New York Times is to the United States, Times of India is to India. It's a prestigious newspaper. So I had written to Baba that I was being interviewed, and immediately a letter came saying that I'm with you wherever you are, there's no need for you to come. And of course, I was devastated. I wrote back a letter saying that this was in the morning that I would come and so on and so forth. I begged and pleaded in my letter, and then he relented and said, okay, let him come. But that I would not be able to attend the wedding, but that I can come in the latter half of the afternoon. So I finished my interview in Bombay, took the train, came right over. Mehran Jasawala was at the railway station waiting for me. He says, come along, Baba is waiting for you. So I come, and he takes me to Meher Colony, and there's all of Irish's relatives there, and they just opened up my bag, and they opened up their cupboards, and they pulled out their perfumes, their powder, their cream. You're going to be with Baba, you should smell good for him. So they applied all this, and when I land there, I see Aaron standing there. Baba's waiting for you, Baba's waiting for you. Come along. So it was like, rush. And I couldn't even, I saw some of the invitees and guests. There was a pandal there and so forth. This was in the afternoon, around 2:30, 3 or so. So I go in, and Baba is lying on his bed. And at that moment, when I go in, there weren't any chairs there. So Iris said, sit on Baba's bed. So there was the space, Baba's body was in the middle, and I sat there was enough space on the edge of the bed for me to sit. And then 4 people came in. And if I recollect correctly, they were my uncle, Ilcha Mistry, Jim Mistry, and Pendu. And Irich was already there. So, well, this was supposed to be, in essence, a glow meeting of the editorial board, so to say. So, the question came up about, first of all, the question came about the job. I had been interviewed at 3 different places. I had already been in the army for some time. I was selected for the Air Force, and I was selected for Times of India. The Army and the Air Force paid more money, and Times of India paid a pittance. As you all know, journalists are paid very little. So there was this issue about what job should I take? So Pendu was asked, and Pendu said, Baba, Baba used to call me military. Pendu used to call me military man. So at the very end, he would call me a military man because I grew up in a town called Dehradun, and that was a military station. So every young man over there wanted to join the military and all the split and polish and brass and all that stuff. So I would go around with my little gun and he used to call me military man. See, so Baba, he's always been in the military, so probably the military would be good for him. So, and then my uncle Ilcha, he asked Ilcha, he says, oh Baba, he started the glow and his mind is all writing, he wants to write all the time, and he's been writing for you. And so he heard everybody's opinion. Then he asked me, and I said, Baba, whatever you say. So he said, and he says, okay, Times of India. And he moved his fingers very, very gently. And Erich said, don't change your mind. So Baba said, no, that wasn't what he was trying to say. Then he again moved his fingers. And I think Jim Mystery interjected and said something that, don't keep thinking about it, or something. Again, very, very painfully. In those days, Baba used to get severe spasms. Very, very painfully. He moves his hands alphabetically to give the correct word. It had to be the right word. Don't vacillate. Now it could have been change your mind, would have been the same, pretty much close, but no. Don't vacillate. That means don't go here and there. It's decided you're joining Times of India and that's it. And that is why I emphasize that there is a power, there is a force behind Meher Baba's words. We need to treat it with utmost respect. We need to communicate them correctly. It's human nature to interpret them. Yesterday we had a meeting where we handled Meher Baba's words, and several people asked questions. What does it mean? How do we interpret it? Each individual have 100 different interpretations. But these words were given in order to awaken us to his love, not to hang on to the words by themselves. In other words, he wanted us to go beyond words. The importance was to awaken us to what was contained in the meaning of those words. And it was the force of those words that he was able to communicate with us. And that's the feeling that I got at that moment. That to him the word vacillate was so important. 5 different interpretations didn't matter, but what mattered was vacillate. Then Baba asked Erich to tell me what he was doing in seclusion. So Erich narrated to me that Baba would sit with a towel over his head and pound his hand on his knee. And then Erich says, touch Baba's thigh. And he said massage Baba's thigh. So I started massaging his thigh, and I could very well be massaging this table. It was hard as a rock. And I had written several letters, and he had responded to me about his health. I had been very concerned. And at that moment, when this thought crossed my mind about his health, Baba turns to me and says, my time has come. And then a few minutes later he said, this is my crucifixion. Then Erich said that Baba wants you to embrace him. He has not permitted anyone to embrace him in a long time. And it is his gift, his grace, that he's allowing you to embrace him. So embrace him. But don't crush his body. Embrace him very gently. Baba did not embrace me back, but I embraced him and I kissed him. And then, by the time all the others had left, and I stepped out, I backed out, and then there was a very gentle clap. Erich was also with me as I stepped out. And I came back in, and Baba said something. And Erich said, Baba says my time has come. Second reminder. And I step out. I would like to end. I know that you've said 5 minutes. I'll take about 2 or 3 minutes to narrate the end of my story. 40 days later, I was to take, it was the first day of my first job. When I met Baba on that day, 40 days before, it was an interview for the first day of my first job. This was my actual first day of my first job. So I had worn a suit, a very thin suit and tie to go on the job. I was getting dressed. And I get a phone call early in the morning from a cousin of mine to ask me if I had seen the Times of India that mornings. And I said no. So I went to the door, picked it up, and there on the front page was a picture of Meher Baba with flowers around him, with this thing, and below that was Meher Baba found dead in a cave. Apparently, some reporter had seen his body in the crypt and mistaken it for that he had died in that cave, because the tomb is like with rocks, so I don't know what he must have, or somebody must have conveyed it to him in some way, but everybody thought, and even I thought, that Meher Baba must have been in seclusion in a cave and died in a cave. So it came as a complete shock, and I dropped the phone and blanked out completely. And the first thought in my mind, what will I do now that he's not there? What will I do now? So, selfish thought, but what will I do now? So I put the phone back, and a few minutes later this cousin called me back because I hadn't responded to her. So I said I have to leave now. And I quickly left. I walked into Times of India. I didn't even know which room I had to go to, but I knew where my boss's office was because I was a trainee for a short period of time. And I go and tell my boss, first thing, I say, good morning, sir, but I need to leave right now. He says, why? I said, sir, have you seen the Times of India? This was the Times of India. He says, yes, I've seen it. I said, my spiritual master has passed away, and I have to leave right now. So, in India they understand. So, he said, yes. And I had nothing with me. I was wearing a suit, very, very thin suit. In that weather, you don't wear heavy suits. I went there, I didn't even know. I took a bus all the way. I ended up in Ahmednagar. First of all, I thought that Baba had dropped his body. I'd been meeting bus loads of people heading in that direction. But there was nobody. So I take a bus and I end up at 11 o'clock at night. I had some money on me. I end up at 11 o'clock at night. And there was pitch dark. So I've never been to MeherBaba before, ever. So there was this Tonga. I take the Tonga and I tell him to take me to this place. I go there and I don't see a soul anywhere. There was nobody climbing up the hill. There was no man. I said, this must be false. This must be false. It's not true. Otherwise there would be some activity here. So I woke up. It was freezing night that day. I was cold. So I go up with the same thought in my mind. At that moment I felt that if Meher Baba had not dropped his body, what would be my next step? So as I go up, I see the tomb there. And in those days there was the seclusion cabins for those Prem Ashram boys. And there was a parapet, and on the parapet was a tray with a light burning there. That was all that I could see. The Zoroastrians put a light over there. And I saw a few villagers sitting over there. And then on an edge was a man sitting with his head covered in a quilt. It was so cold. So this man raises the quilt, and it was Iraj. And he says, Naosherwan, you've come? I said, yes. He says, go quickly. sit inside before the crowd start coming. So I go in and I close the door. They had a door at that time. You know, they didn't have that extension and so forth. I close the door and I sit there, and Iraj gives me his torch. So I go in and I sit in Baba's body, who's dead, in the crypt, ice all around. So I go down, take a couple of steps down, hold his feet, and just keep thinking, what will I do without him? Just this thought kept coming. So I would shine the torch on his face and then sit, and these thoughts would come to my mind. And I said to myself, I said, Baba, I promise you that I will write your biography. I took a promise. Give him a promise. And then I would switch on the light, and I would sit and look at his face, stare at his face, again hold his feet. And at one point, I put the torch on his face and he opens his eyes. And he looks at me. I said, oh, Baba. And immediately I turned the torch away and I put the torch again on his face and his eyes were closed. Immediately a tremendous lightness. It's as if a huge stone had been taken off my shoulder. It was as if Baba was saying that I'm with you. And that's all I can say. Baba is with us all.